the actual history of sports shows that sports were integrated after the Civil War. The first Kentucky Derby in 1875, 16 of the 17 jockeys were African American. All sports were integrated. It wouldn't have not have occurred to people to have them be segregated. But that changes with the advent of Jim Crow. That's when you see the whitening of sports. In fact, the only sport that remained integrated during this time was boxing. They knew that they could make money by pitting a white boxer against a black boxer, and they always knew where the limit was, though. They never let an African American actually become the heavyweight champion until Jack Johnson literally ran down Tommy Burns and became the champion that way. Jack Johnson fought in a way that was highly cerebral. He was influenced by martial arts, and that challenged people's notions about all African American people. And on top of that, Jack Johnson was somebody who was never shy about telling people that they could kiss his ass.
Hitler's master race was on display, but his ideas of racial superiority were about to be repudiated by the performance of African-American athlete Jesse Owens.
Surrounded by Nazi propaganda and its doctrine of Aryan superiority, Owens became the dominant figure of the 1936 Games in Berlin. He was cheered every time he entered the stadium and treated like a star. He was, after all, the fastest man in the world, black or white.
When you talk about history in the United States, it's impossible to speak about the civil rights movement without talking about Jackie Robinson. Dr. King was greatly influenced by Jackie Robinson and Jackie Robinson's breaking of baseball's color barrier in 1947. And years later, he said of Jackie Robinson, he was a sit-inner before sit-ins. He was a freedom rider before freedom rides. It's impossible to speak about the 1960s without talking about Muhammad Ali. What's so amazing is the way he captured this entire era of the 1960s as being this figure of not only great rebellion, but also a figure who was somehow sanctioned and okay to despise. And what's so amazing about him, and this was part of the history I learned, is that in 1968, he had his passport taken away. He'd been sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth. He was out on appeal. And in 1968, he could have holed up in his house. I mean, everybody had turned their back on him at this point. He decided to go on a campus speaking tour. And during that year, he made 200 talks on college campuses. So the 60s happened to Muhammad Ali and changed him irrevocably. And then Muhammad Ali changed the 60s. So you see this incredibly dynamic relationship work back and forth. In the last couple of years, we've seen things like the entire Miami Heat team with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, their superstars in the lead, all wearing hoods in protest at the time at the fact that George Zimmerman had not been arrested for the shooting of Trayvon Martin. And many athletes like Carmelo Anthony of the New York Knicks, he was very vocal about that as well.
One of the most talked about stories in America comes from the football sideline. San Francisco quarterback Colin Kaepernick has ignited a firestorm conversation after refusing to stand during the national anthem.
I can't look in the mirror and see other people dying on the street that should have the same opportunities that I've had and say, you know what, I can live with myself, because I can't if I just watch. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, people aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change.
I find it so interesting how people want to pick and choose what rights people have. The same way John, Carlos, and Tommy Smith raised their black glove fist in '68 Olympics in Mexico. These are rights that Americans have.
It says something in and of itself that we can be critical of about this country, that oftentimes it takes athletes of a particular ethnicity to actually educate the rest of us, particularly white America, that these folks are not in fact invisible and that they are part of this country.